All right, everyone, we have 4 U.S. senators, all far-left Democrats, which is, not exactly a surprise, who don't understand the broad philosophical underpinning of the U.S. Constitution, especially the First Amendment. And so they're calling on Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, so sue me, trying to coerce her into, I guess, suppressing or banning people if they believe that there was any election fraud. They're like, oh my God, the Georgia runoff elections are coming and you need to do more because people have opinions that we don't agree with. Basically, you want mainline sites like CNN that told people it was illegal to read WikiLeaks releases. You want state-run media to be dominant, essentially, state-run and state-co-opted media on these platforms. Partially, I'll tell you why. It's not even because of this. It's to start the ball rolling to set a precedent for basically an incoming Biden neoliberal administration to be able to crush people out if they're claiming, hey, here's the U.S. government's warmongering. They're trying to bully third worlders around. Here, the tax code is wrong. The election's screwy. Something happened in the world that's not right. There's a scandal or something. They don't want people to be able to report on these things. See, the independent media has balls. The independent media is not sucking corporate cock. And so what happens is somebody like me will actually report on these things. You're not going to get that from CNN. You're not going to get it from Fox. They've signaled that they're going to sit things out as well. So you got Amy Klobuchar, so basically the box wine mom from Coraline. And then you have Menendez, which is not exactly a surprise. Hirono, which nobody outside of Hawaii, I think, has ever fucking heard of. And then Peters, Gary Peters, I think it is. And these 4 are they've sent a letter to YouTube HQ demanding that they do more. You need to do more about election fraud, disinformation. Now, here's the thing. The claim that these claims in and of themselves are disinfo is ironically itself, paradoxically, disinformation. Just like the idea that there was ever a libertarian to alt-right pipeline on YouTube. It never existed. Just like the idea that alt-tech is dominated by Nazis. That's simply not true. None of the claims that these censorious authoritarian hacks are making are true. The problem is that they simply repeat the same lie over and over. What they do is they repeat the same lie over and over, the politicians and the lame streamers. They get the MSM to report on it, and then they convince the public that it's true without any actual evidence whatsoever. You remember the Data Society report that was used to drum up attacks on alt-tech and upon various internet users cross-platform? You remember that report? Nobody ever thought that it was a little bit interesting that Sargon of Akkad and the Thinkery, which is also Sargon of Akkad, were in different categories under their schema. Nobody ever thought that it was a little bit odd that a dude with 666 in his username was considered some sort of fucking tradcon in the alt-light category. Very, very interesting. Half a dozen of their categories didn't even make sense for the users. And yet it was held up as though this report actually was properly sourced. What sources? Did you even bother to read the report? No, it had basically, they looked at the abstract, which by the way omitted any mention of me even being in the Sargon-Spencer debate, and I felt very sad about that. I was hoping there'd be more of a hit piece against me in that because, I deserve it because, I won the debate. Just saying, what happens is that the MSM would look at the abstract. They didn't check the sources. Nobody had the time to look through the whole thing. They just assumed, well, the Data Society, that sounds reliable. Oh wow, there's lots of extremists on YouTube. We need to report on this uncritically. That's the problem. What's happened is that the MSM, the mainstream, doesn't ask questions. They're not doing journalism. The whole premise of journalism, which is that something's been claimed, let me look into it to see whether it's true or not, has been completely tossed out in favor of simply saying, well, this sounds plausible, or happens to be good for the political movement or the political figure that I like, or bad for the one that I dislike, and therefore I'm going to report on it uncritically. The problem is that most of that is malarkey. It's fucking bullshit. Most of what the MSM says at this point, whether it's regarding the election or not, is straight up false. They lie by omission. They simply won't cover the story. They make straw mans. They use a lie by structure, wherein they'll put something in the abstract in the first few lines of their report that's completely contravened or at least questioned by something that's dug in 10 paragraphs later that's much more monumentally important, but that's not what they want people to hear. And so they'll have a report, they'll say insert a random Republican, Ted Cruz faces tough questions about childhood past with ants and a magnifying glass. And then like 10 paragraphs later, it's like, well, yeah, it's basically the one troubled kid at school claiming this, and he's an activist for BLM, by the way. All these other kids have stood up for him, but we've got questions about this the scenario. Meanwhile, you'll have something like the Al Franken photo, and by and large wasn't even reported on, to the point where it took fucking Kirsten Gillibrand to force him out, which was crazy. By the way, she got more respect at the time, but it torpedoed her presidential chances. Hee hee. But yeah, these four authoritarians, and the idea that YouTube is going to set the framework for censoring political opinion and analysis on the basis that it's part of some larger disinfo campaign, here's the problem. The whole concept that there's some sort of larger propagandistic disinfo campaign is blatantly false. It's a conspiracy theory, ironically enough. The Democratic laypeople have gotten, in the wake of the 2016 election and the Russiagate bullshit, the idea in their heads that anything that they happen to disagree with politically falls under one of two umbrellas, and sometimes both. It's foreign state interference or it's domestic extremism, specifically far right. Therefore, even though a political individual or a political movement or a political ideology might be vastly opposed in every demonstrable way from fascism, means that it's fascism either from Russia or from maybe a Middle Eastern tin horn dictatorship or by a bunch of Nazis. For instance, libertarianism, my specific ideology, is opposed to fascism in every possible respect, has nothing in common with totalitarian forms of government, regardless of their form. But that claim is made. You see people on the left making that claim. The problem is that that claim is then uncritically accepted by neoliberal outlets, reported on and used to censor people, ironically proving the point of libertarianism and why it's important to maintain free speech and expression. This is an attack upon the First Amendment, not in the functional sense, and this is something that libertarians do a piss-poor job of explaining. There's a difference between the First Amendment and freedom of speech and expression. The latter is an ideological statement. The only reason the First Amendment exists is because the concept of being able to speak and express yourself freely and engage in activities of the press in the public square, free from repercussions, including privatized repercussions of any meaningful and certainly fiscal manner, in a free society, a capitalistic society in which people can work and get ahead, put their opinions out there, and they can be debated on the merits of their opinions. The fact is that that is an ideological construct that was used as the broad foundation of the First Amendment. For instance, the Second Amendment protects your right to keep and bear arms. The spirit of self-defense is why the Second Amendment was considered important enough to create. The Fourth Amendment protects your right to be guarded in your person and possessions against unreasonable searches and seizures. The idea of the necessity of privacy is the philosophical and civic underpinning regarding why the Fourth Amendment was implemented. The 10th Amendment relegates the federal government in many respects to a backseat role. It talks about state supremacy. Why? Because we wanted a republic comprised of semi-autonomous states that came together in a union form. Essentially now, 50 functionally different countries with different linguistic constructs, different demographics, different economic situations, different needs, different population totals, different climates and geology, different political structures, but they've come together for various purposes under a unionized umbrella. It's a philosophical, it's an Enlightenment style thing. It's a philosophical statement of why it should be important and then safeguarding what is of import. And libertarians need to make that argument, number one. And number two, these senators, obviously, don't understand the historical construct behind why the Constitution exists in its specific form. The ability to speak and express yourself freely at this point requires a free and open internet, because it is the only main method by which people express themselves. The average person doesn't own a newspaper. They don't own a printing press. They don't own a radio broadcast, but they own a computer. They own a smartphone, and that's how they get together with their friends. It's how they organize for jobs. It's how they put out statements about their views on life. It's how they promulgate their religious views. It's how they debate one another. It's everything. It's the internet of everything. YouTube has been an integral part of this, and if Susan Wojcicki listens to this advice, will be pissing away a very large chunk of its politically active, civically minded, and I would say most intelligent proportion of the user base. By the way, there are people that are on the left that are questioning the election results. A third of Democrats believe that the election was fraudulent. A third of Democrats believe that. You're going to kick them all off YouTube? You're going to kick 100 million people off the platform, according to polling. If you look at the voting age population that participated in the election, and you get rid of about half of them, that's like 75, 80 million people, dude. Yeah, YouTube can afford to lose 75 million American English-speaking users. Well, they'll just go to alt tech. And I like this. This is one thing. A little bit of comeuppance for other creators. If this gets through and she's crazy enough to impose this onerous, burdensome, anti-free speech bullshit. Having branched out onto alt tech, what happens is, if I get it banned on YouTube, it'll be part of a greater purge for this reason, and I'll just skyrocket on other platforms. And if it doesn't happen, of course, well, you're not being suppressed and there's no problem. You put yourself into a no-lose scenario, again, to fellow creators. Why aren't you on alt tech? And more importantly, why don't you talk about the fact that you're on alt tech? I see your channels on these various sites, Odyssey, Brighteon, Rumble, BitChute. You got a Daily Motion backup, Vimeo or something. You never talk about them. Nobody knows they exist. You don't check up on them. You never log in. You're not even really an active user half the time. Fix that problem. Promulgate your material. Refuse to be silenced. And more importantly, larger creators in the partner program, voice your concerns. There's a creators helpline that you can use. Why don't you weigh in with this link and tell YouTube it's a bad idea? Say, hey, your CEO has been queried about this. I have concerns. This would destroy a vast swath of creators. A large proportion of YouTube's creator base engages in political dialogue. By the way, if you're looking at 47% of Americans thinking the election was fucked up, there are plenty of people in other countries that are weighing in too. The British love to weigh in on U.S. politics. Half of the biggest commentators on U.S. politics aren't even in the U.S., dude. They're British or French, Swedish or something. That's great. By the way, it's a globalized thing in the good sense, not in the sense of, big corporations screwing over little people in other countries like TPP style. That needs to be maintained, and if YouTube's not willing to maintain it, somebody else will. That's about all. Peace out.